test in an amazing series of accidents on one of the world's great railway journeys. When Why Trains Crash continues. Route 66, the road that first bridged America in 1935. But the railroad got here first. This line, sweeping through the Arizona desert, was laid out in 1883. It's one of the driest places in the world, but these bridges were built to protect against flash floods. Floodwaters should pass under the line, leaving the tracks undamaged. But if a bridge failed, how would a train cope today? This is also the route of America's most famous transcontinental passenger train. The Southwest Chief runs from Los Angeles to Chicago. 2,220 miles in 2 days. Los Angeles, Grand Union Station. On the evening of August 8, 1997, 294 passengers made their way onto the waiting train. They settled in for a long trip. The Southwest Chief rushed through California, crossing the Arizona state line in the early hours of the morning. At 5:30 a.m., a stop to change crews at the small railroad town of Kingman. Nothing unusual about this run, except the weather. Under flash flooding from torrential rains, the bridges were being tested, including one just east of Kingman.
The railroad did dispatch an inspector in order to assess the bridge, make a visual inspection. Just prior to when the chief passed over that particular bridge, a freight train had passed by that site going the opposite direction, that is going westbound, and there was no apparent damage to the bridge.
Like the boat train 112 years earlier, the Southwest Chief was heading blindly into danger. Instead of 45 miles an hour, this train was doing 90 as it thundered toward the bridge.
The locomotive crew did see the dip in the track, but of course they were far too close to stop before crossing the bridge.
Dawn revealed a scene of devastation. Amid panic and confusion, rescuers radioed for additional help. Early reports had at least 8 passengers dead, many more injured. The torrent had washed away most of the bridge, leaving just the metal rails to support the weight of the train. Where the timber supports had been, now one of the Southwest Chief's sleeper cars straddled the gap. But as the sun climbed higher, everyone at the scene began to view things in a new light. Doctors took a head count at Kingman High School, where the injured had been taken. A passenger list was found. Then they counted again. In their astonishment, everyone was safely accounted for. What had seemed like a disaster began to look more like a miracle. The Southwest Chief had won this battle with the elements, but this was just round 1. Earthquake. On October 16, 1999, a severe earthquake, 7 on the Richter scale, shook California. The epicenter was in the Mojave Desert, 100 miles east of Los Angeles. It struck at 2 in the morning, exactly when the Southwest Chief was passing through. The train was shaken right off the tracks. Rescuers could hardly believe that once again, no one was killed in this derailment at 60 miles an hour. 4 people were injured, but the battered carriages remained upright. Surely this train had passed the tests. Not yet. On March 15th, 2000, at 2 in the morning, the Southwest Chief crashed for the 3rd time. It was rounding a bend at 60 miles an hour when it left the tracks near Topeka, Kansas. There were 155 passengers and crew on board. 35 went to the hospital, but no one was killed. 3 high-speed crashes in 3 years. What saved the passengers on the Southwest Chief?
The principal thing is that the train did remain intact. The couplers are very effective in keeping the cars together. They are very effective in essentially keeping the whole train together.
These couplings were designed to survive a derailment at 90 miles an hour, a huge advance on earlier designs.
The earlier couplers that were used in passenger equipment allowed substantial vertical motion. Matter of fact, they were pretty much unrestrained. If you took a car that was in the middle of a train and tried to lift it up, you'd have no difficulty doing that. One might expect if you had those kinds of couplers that the cars would indeed come undone and you'd essentially end up with a large pile of what used to be passenger cars.
The carriages were also a state-of-the-art design, built with a collision in mind.
You have the strong part of the cars that can crush in a controlled fashion, which hopefully should limit the amount of injuries and the severity of injuries that an occupant might experience during a collision.
To cross half of the country, the Southwest Chief has to carry huge amounts of fuel, 2,000 gallons in a single tank. Fire can turn a derailment into a disaster, but the train had fuel tanks of a brand new design.
And this particular train has fuel tanks which are located up inside the car body itself rather than a frame-suspended fuel tank which we've seen on earlier equipment. Having more ground clearance provides for space that debris and track that is damaged in a derailment to harmlessly pass beneath the locomotive and hence not puncture the fuel tank.
It may be the unluckiest train in the world, but it just might be the toughest too. The Southwest Chief proved the benefits of designing for a disaster, proved how far we've come in the 150 years since the boat train ran off the bridge and shattered into pieces.